All right, let's dive right into one of the most transformative periods in Indian history. We're talking about the 19th century. Now, this was a time of absolutely massive, unsettling change, and it was all driven by this handful of incredible people who just looked at the world around them and said, you know what? We can do better.
I mean, think about it for a second. How do you fix a broken society? It's a huge question, right? When the very foundations seem like they're crumbling, thanks to, centuries of old customs and really deep inequality, where do you even start?
Well, that was the exact challenge that a group of Indian visionaries decided to take on back in the 19th century. These weren't just people pointing out problems. No, they dedicated their whole lives to finding solutions. And in doing so, they kicked off this era of super intense and honestly often dangerous debate that would completely change the future of the nation.
Okay, so to really get what they were trying to do, we first have to understand just how big the problems were. I mean, what exactly were these reformers up against? Let's take a look.
And honestly, the list of issues is pretty staggering. You had the horrific practice of sati, where widows were literally burned alive. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. The caste system was so rigid it labeled millions of people as untouchable. Child marriage? Super common. And for most women, things like basic rights or an education just weren't even a possibility. So the need for change wasn't just some abstract idea. It was a literal matter of life and death. So into all this turmoil steps this incredible figure, a man who's often called the father of modern India, Raja Ram Mohan Roy. He was this brilliant scholar, a real visionary, and his big idea wasn't to just throw out tradition, not at all. He believed the answer was to go back and find its purest, most logical roots.
Now, to turn these ideas into an actual movement, Roy started an organization in 1828 called the Brahmo Samaj. And it's really important to get this. He wasn't trying to start a new religion. The whole point was to reform Hinduism from the inside. He wanted to strip away all the rituals that had built up over centuries and get back to what he saw as the core truth, worshiping one God guided by reason.
And wow, this guy was relentless. He launched his fight against sati way back in 1818, even setting up groups to watch over funeral pyres. He used ancient texts to argue that the practice had no religious basis at all. And it worked. His campaigning was a huge reason the government finally banned sati in 1829. But he didn't stop there, not by a long shot. He was also fighting for women's property rights, pushing for modern education that blended Western and Indian ideas, and he even helped start Indian journalism to keep everyone informed. And this quote from Roy really gets to the heart of his whole philosophy. You see, for him, you couldn't separate religion from society. He basically argued that for India to move forward politically, for people to just live better lives, you had to challenge the religious ideas that were holding everyone back. It all started there. Okay, so while Roy was kind of working from the top down, there was another way more radical movement bubbling up from below. And this one didn't just want to tweak the system. It wanted to completely tear down its most oppressive feature from the ground up, the caste system. And the people leading this charge, that would be Jyotirao and Savitribai Phule. So in 1873, Jyotirao Phule started something called the Satyashodhak Samaj, which means the Truth Seekers Society. And this was a whole different ballgame from the Brahmo Samaj. Why? Because its members and its leaders were from the lower castes themselves. Their goal wasn't just reform, it was a revolution, powered by education to empower women and oppressed communities and completely transform society. And right at the heart of all this was the absolutely incredible Savitribai Phule. Her story is just, wow. She was married off when she was just a kid, and her husband Jyotirao taught her how to read and write, which was completely against the rules back then. Get this, when she would walk to the school for girls that they started, people would throw mud and even cow dung at her. So she'd just carry a spare sari with her, change when she got there, and teach. That's the kind of person we're talking about. She didn't just kickstart education for girls, she created a safe haven for society's most vulnerable people. So, okay, we've got this top-down, rationalist approach from Roy and this revolutionary, grassroots approach from the Phules. But it wasn't just those two options. The 19th century was like this buzzing marketplace of ideas. It got pretty heated, with all these different groups fiercely debating what the spiritual future of India should even look like.
And this table gives you a great snapshot of that diversity. You've got Roy's Brahma Samaj focused on reason. Then there's the Arya Samaj, which had this powerful call to go back to the Vedas. They wanted to return to the oldest, purest scriptures. And then you have a totally different take from the Ramakrishna mission and Swami Vivekananda, whose core idea was simple but profound. Service to man is service to God.
1893. Just 1 year. But it was a year that was about to change everything. Not just how the world saw India, but how India saw itself.
Because this was the year that Swami Vivekananda stood up at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago. And he just electrified the audience. He painted this picture of Hinduism that was universal, that was tolerant, that was deeply spiritual. He wasn't just defending a faith. He was putting a whole civilization on the global map. But his message wasn't just for the outside world, you know? While a lot of reformers were focused inward on their own communities, Vivekananda was preaching this pretty radical message of harmony. He said the only hope for India's future was a junction of its two great systems, Hinduism and Islam. That's a powerful vision for a united nation, right?
So after all this struggle, all this debate, what was the verdict? What was the lasting impact? Well, as you can probably guess, it's complicated.
On the one hand, the positive effects were huge. These reformers basically pulled India out of its cultural isolation. They built a new sense of self-respect and national pride, and they really paved the way for modernization. But it's not the whole story. For one thing, most of these ideas stayed in the cities. They didn't really reach the villages. And here's the other big thing. In trying to build pride by looking back to a glorious ancient Hindu past, some of these movements ended up accidentally drawing sharper lines between different religious communities. And that focus on one specific heritage sometimes came at the expense of India's mixed culture, planting the seeds for future conflict.
And this quote from Subhash Chandra Bose, one of the great leaders of the independence movement, really nails it. He called Vivekananda the spiritual father of the modern nationalist movement. What he meant was that all the work these reformers did, building up that self-respect, that pride in Indian culture, that became the spiritual fuel for the political fight for freedom that came next. Because at the end of the day, getting a law passed to ban sati or opening a new school, that was huge. But it was just the start. The real revolution was in how people thought. For the first time, these reformers forced the whole nation to kind of look itself in the mirror and ask some really tough questions. Who are we? What do we believe in? And where are we going?
And that brings us right back to today, doesn't it? The ongoing fight for women's rights, the battle against caste discrimination, the search for real harmony between different communities. These aren't just things we read about in history books. They are the living, breathing